Welcome everyone to another session in the World Universities Summit on Universities of the Future, Building Institutional Resilience, Social Responsibility and Community Impact in the G20 countries. This particular session with an excellent panel is on the theme Rising to the Challenge, Transformative Leadership in Times of Uncertainty. So I'm R. Sudarshan. I'm the Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy at the OP Jindal Global University, and it's my great pleasure to moderate this panel and the discussion. And we've got with us the panelists, Professor John Dewar from Trobe University, Dr. Lulu Maestre from Baja, California, Mexico. We've got Professor Judith Rankin from Newcastle University in the United Kingdom, and Dr. Lulu Setiawati from the Matana University in Indonesia. So good morning, good afternoon, salamat sore, Ibu Lulu, and good evening, depending on the time zones we are all in. So just to introduce the scene, we've all been familiar with the term that we are living in a VUCA world. I mean, that's been in currency for some time, the acronym referring to volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But as with many things, this has been taken up replaced by a new acronym, and the new acronym is BANI, Bani. Now, Bani means language in Sanskrit. It means a style of music in some languages, a tradition of music. But in this context, this term is meant to say that the world we are now living in is characterized as brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. So VUCA has been displaced by Bani, and so a lot of business schools, of course, get onto this. What should corporate leadership do in these circumstances, and so on? And our aim here is to figure out what are universities to do in a situation where, the brittleness, that is a minor, or what seems to be a minor accident, chaos, disruption, could have much more lasting consequences than we might have expected. And there's undoubtedly that sort of a thing requires some kind of resilience. When things break down, you don't want the entire system to collapse. You're able to quickly fix the damage when it's brittle. Then we've got anxiety, which is undoubtedly the case. The pandemic, COVID-19 has vastly increased that. So there's anxiety in students, anxiety in faculty. There's a lot of genuine anxiety. And that, I suppose, calls for, in terms of leadership qualities, something like empathy and mindfulness to cope. And then there's, of course, non-linearity, which means that that there's general cause-effect relationships that we've habitually come to expect may not be there. And so non-linearity would require much more context-specific understanding and much more agility and flexibility in terms of what we do as leaders in a university. And now incomprehensibility, first of all calls for some humility but it also calls for some, a lot of transparency, and it calls for more intuitive judgment than, relying upon data and empirical analysis of the kind that many of our disciplines are engaged in. But in terms of leadership, our ability to make practical judgments, to rely upon our intuitions is being greatly taxed. And so this is really something that's really happening, that all our systems, from globalization, trade, flows of information, relationships with the social media, families, friends, colleagues, all of them are undergoing a change. It's like almost as if, as a scholar put it, it's a phase transition from water to steam. That's the situation we are in. And so this requires, some serious reflection as to what, in terms of leadership, particularly of universities, ought we to be thinking in a world that's gone on from VUCA to Bani. So that's the context. And so I request each of the panelists to take about 5 minutes to reflect upon the larger context that I've just outlined and what we might be doing in these circumstances. And then after that round, we'll come back to some more specific questions that I'd like to pose, and then we'll also open it up to some questions that our audience would have. So that's how we are going to go about it. So I have great pleasure in inviting Dr. John Dewar from La Trobe University. I have to mention that in the year 2000, I visited La Trobe. Oliver Mendelsohn was a professor at that time in law who studied a lot on India, and we had a conference and published a book with Oxford University Press called The Rights of Subordinated Peoples, because 2000 was the year of the bicentenary of Australia, and that meant something else for the indigenous peoples. So we've come a long way from that, and Australia has been wonderful in terms of its recognition of what it owes to the original inhabitants of that land, and we admire that politically the country has taken that stance, and there's always a reference to the original inhabitants. Now, whenever you say anything in Australia, and that's very sincere. And so I'm a great admirer and very fond of my memories of La Trobe. So over to you, Professor Dewar.
Thank you very much, Professor Sudarshan. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I am speaking this evening. In my case, it's just after 7 o'clock in the evening, the Tamarong people of Central Victoria. And you're right that this year is a very big year for Australia's First Nations people, because later this year there'll be a referendum to vote on a change to the Australian Constitution that would enshrine in the Constitution a right to what's called a voice to Parliament for Indigenous peoples. That means that they would have the constitutionally enshrined right to advise both the Parliament and the executive government on matters coming before either the Parliament or executive that affect First Nations people. So it's a really big change. I really hope it gets up, but we'll have to wait until October to find out. But thank you for that wonderful introduction. I hadn't heard of Barney before, but I shall use it from now on. Look, I wanted to situate my remarks in the context of our experience of COVID, because I think that really sharpened many of the themes that this session touches on, and many of the sessions you mentioned in your introduction. Just to set the scene a little for Australia, the closure of international borders in early 2020, of course, wreaked havoc on the Australian higher education system, particularly in financial terms. It's an impact from which the sector is not yet fully recovered. In fact, at the time, I remember thinking this is going to be an event that will probably take between 6 to 8 years to flow through. And it's possible that for various reasons that Australia was worse affected by COVID, partly because of our greater than average reliance on international student revenue. But what this meant for us was that we had to look at everything we did. We lost somewhere between 20 and 25% of our revenue, which is not something you can manage simply by cutting budgets here and there. You have to rethink fundamentally what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, and really what you're about as an institution. So it forced us into a number of far-reaching reforms, some of which we had already embarked on, but COVID gave us an added incentive to do it quickly, and some of which we probably wouldn't have thought about but for the arrival of COVID. But I'm talking about things like reforming our academic programs, our degree structures, moving much faster into online, thinking about the way we allocate research funding within the university, thinking about digital transformation of the organization, really accelerating that, completely redesigning our academic structures, and moving away from degrees as the sole product, if you like, of universities. Because if COVID taught us nothing else, it was that people needed to reskill very quickly, and we had to respond to that. There were, however, some benefits from this. Although it was a terrible period, looking back, I think there were some real benefits that we enjoyed as a result. As I said, we accelerated existing programs of work so that something that would have taken 2 or 3 years probably took no more than a year to implement. But it forced us, as I say, to go further, to think about how we run ourselves, how we organize ourselves in quite profound ways. And I'm pleased to say that all of that hard work has paid off, in that the Trobe University is now emerging very strongly from the pandemic, perhaps in ways that other institutions may not. But where we've ended up, I believe, is an endpoint to which I've been pushing my university for some time. I called it University 4.0 some time ago, and I think COVID exemplified why we had to move in this direction. And there are 4 ingredients of that. Firstly, students have to be able to experience a seamless handoff between different modes of learning. We've now moved much faster and further in that direction than we ever thought we would. We had to move away from the 3-year bachelor's degree as the sole offering. We now offer a much broader range of types of qualification, including what are sometimes called micro-credentials or short courses. That's become a much bigger part of our activity. We focus much more on employability of our graduates. We were focusing on that before, but I think COVID really emphasized the importance of that. And finally, we've put a lot more emphasis than we had previously on attracting physically co-located industry partners onto our campus. We have a very big campus in the north of Melbourne. So my reflections on that experience are that leadership in these sorts of times requires a number of ingredients. The first is the capacity to see what's coming and to be brave, as you were saying, Professor Sudarshan, not endlessly looking at the data, and you have to make a decision about what you're going to do. So a certain degree of bravery. I think you have to be authentic and transparent with the people in your organization, which I hope we were. You have to offer your staff hope. You have to offer them a vision of what's coming or what we're pushing towards. You have to care for them. So you mentioned the importance of what was the word you used? I think it was it was a word to do with being caring and attentive to the needs of staff. I think. Sorry?
Empathetic.
That's the one. Thank you. That's the one. And finally, the importance of communication. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but never before, I think, has that been more important than during a period of transition. But I think all of those lessons are ones that apply post-COVID as well as pre-COVID for reasons that I'm sure we'll get into. So I'll stop there.
So thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. A great pleasure in inviting President Maestre of the Autonomous University in Baja, California, Mexico, for his reflections following yours.
Thank you, Professor Sudarshan. Thank you to Jindal Global University for the opportunity of sharing some thoughts with the audience. It is a privilege to also share this virtual space with colleagues from other universities from around the globe. This may only be possible because of the advances in remote communication technology, which is now part of our daily use because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The ability to interact in real time with global partners worldwide is perhaps one of the few bright spots that came along with this tragedy. Well before the pandemic, due to a series of earthquakes that raised the alert in the northwestern part of Mexico, the Universidad Autónoma de Baja California, our university, had already been working on using information and communication technologies that would facilitate remote work in the event of that being necessary. But the pandemic reached Latin America and the Caribbean, where, according to information from the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America, 2/3 of the countries did not reach the download speeds requirements necessary to develop digital solutions, and where 46% of children between the ages of 5 and 12 years old could not participate in online education activities. In addition, about 33% of urban households were not connected, and that was a huge problem for us. Even though furthermore, we have more than 77% of rural households that are not connected to the internet in Latin America. This technological gap made evident in a region of the planet and within our countries. By 2019, before the pandemic, Mexico had the most expensive internet rate in Latin America. That also posed a huge challenge for us. However, in the northern part of Mexico, where the Universidad Autónoma of Baja California is located, on the border with the United States of America, their internet continues to be more accessible than in the south part of Mexico. However, in our university, the COVID-19 pandemic caused us to speed up actions in order to offer online courses to more than 66,000 students, while offering access to computers for those who did not have one at home. One of the consequences of the pandemic crisis was the need to rethink the dimensions of higher education, such as student mobility, academic exchange, and collaboration in research projects with other groups abroad. Thus, one of the lessons learned has been giving more value and priority to diversifying undergraduate and postgraduate learning modalities. Also, we have seen how faculty willingness to participate in entry-level and advanced training programs for improving the use of information and communication technology. This being now a part of our daily work, along with this, such a lesson has raised the need to rethink our educational model, which has remained unchanged for the last 17 years. So we have a huge challenge ahead of us. We have to rethink the way that higher education is provided in development countries. I'm going to leave it right here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I quickly turn over to Professor Judith Rankin, who's the Dean of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. DEI or EDI has become another acronym. Most universities now have to, provide evidence for this. So over to you for your reflections.
Thank you very much, Professor Sudarshan. So it's my absolute pleasure to be on this panel today. Thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me. And it's a good morning from me from Newcastle upon Tyne in the United Kingdom. That's not the Newcastle in Australia, of course, but the one in the UK. As you say, my role as Dean of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion is to lead the strategic direction in EDI at our university. But this morning, I'm going to reflect a little bit more about what we're doing in terms of our approach to leadership for the future. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what we're doing, and I'm sure that will come out further in some of the questioning. But I thought I'd start by reflecting, as others have done, on these times of uncertainty that we're currently living in, whether that's as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the recovery stage that we're now in, whether it's the cost of living crisis, which is a very dominant theme here in the UK, the competitive talent landscape that we're in, or the shift to a sustainable way of hybrid working whilst managing colleague well-being, and numerous other challenges. I feel that we do need to take a different approach to leadership in higher education. As I say, I will just outline some of the things that we're doing here at Newcastle in our approach to leadership. Very traditionally, higher education has been a challenging environment with a culture predicated on challenge and intellectual rigor. We need a radical shift from this historical approach if we are to rise to the current and future leadership challenges. And I suggest that we should be doing this by approaching leaders and developing our leaders at all levels by leading through our values. So here at Newcastle University, we are aiming to develop and promote leaders of the future who can demonstrate their institutional values and have the people skills to support everyone to buy into a shared vision and to work together to deliver it. We feel this new approach must be inclusive. It must aim to break down silos and hierarchies and support all leaders to engage with the part that they can play as leaders and, more importantly, as role models. Our future leaders can lead and create an organisational culture that is aligned to the purpose, values and goals of their institution. And this is based on two main tenets: that having an aligned culture is key to long-term organisational effectiveness and success, and that a belief that leaders fundamentally shape organisational culture by the way they behave, the things that they pay attention to, and the system that they create that will ultimately influence and set the tone of the culture of that institution. So to meet our current and no doubt, unfortunately, future challenges, a new approach to leadership is needed. One which equips each of our leaders with the knowledge, motivation and confidence to influence culture positively through their own actions and behaviours. Their leadership should be embedded in a set of values that informs their behaviours and practices, and that is credible, transparent and empathetic. Empathetic is a word that's come up already in this panel. We do need communication, as Professor Dewar has already alluded to, but I would also add to that we need ongoing engagement with our whole university communities and the willingness to actively promote and act on that engagement. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have great pleasure in inviting Dr. Lulu Setiawati from the Matana University in Indonesia. Over to you, Ibu Lulu.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sudarshan, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evenings to our audience and the panelists. I will have my reflections. As we also know and agree, right, the extreme uncertainty that we are facing in the last 3 years is about the pandemic COVID-19, and it's also affect our country, as you know that Indonesia has many thousands of islands. When the pandemic hit us, it's really big, bringing a big impact, especially in our educations, because students no longer able to go to schools to do the offline, and we have to go online. As you also know that the infrastructures is become a big problem for us in terms of the telecommunications. So many students really cannot go to schools at the time. And as a country, we also get hit in economically, and also we have a high unemployment rate. And thanks God that they are trying to recover lately. But when we are talking about the uncertainty, I believe that all of us knows that it's not only about the pandemic. Perhaps in the future, we might face the uncertainty also. So my reflection is that we need to find a certain leadership styles that we can help us to face the uncertainty. During the uncertainty, it is very important for leaders to have ability to generate new ideas and have critical thinking. In the process for transformative and collective action during uncertainty times, leadership needs to build trust among followers and employees. Leaders need to take appropriate actions by doing preparation and planning, seek information, adapt and carry out a coordinated response. As a university leaders, we need to take responsibility and accountability, offer hope, create a credible vision, develop guidance, and remain closely connected to people on which their decisions are impacting. And as we also know that uncertainty and crisis can change the way people respond to their leaders. Followers look up to the leaders to provide a clear vision and directions for the futures and pay close attention to how the leaders react to the uncertainty. For the theme for the discussion panel today about rising to the challenge, transformative leadership in times. We know that when we talk about the transformative leadership, it's a change-focused perspective of leadership that reflects a leader's commitment to achieve the goals of an organization while trying to meet the needs of the individuals who make up the organizations. And transformational leaders are adaptable, and agility is the key. And I believe that agility, adaptability is the key factors that makes us as leaders to be successful in our leadership. There are a few critical characteristics a transformative leader should have, especially during the uncertain time, such as having a clear sense of purpose, being value-driven, acting as an obvious role model, having high expectations, persistent, and the leader has to be lifelong learners also and able to identify themselves as change agents. And I leave it up to now.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for complying with the time specification of the organizers. That actually leaves us some time to discuss some specific issues that I'd like to bring up. One thing, though, is that universities have been remarkably robust. I mean, we are a very young university, but universities in Europe, the top 20 universities in Europe, somebody calculated, have been around for have an average age of 345 years. Now, Bologna, Oxford, Cambridge would have more than 800 and so on. But universities have been around, they've met challenges, they've overcome challenges, they've proved themselves to be relevant to the countries they are in. So that might give us some confidence, but we've also confronted with this Barney business now. And one feature that's occurring in many universities is that there seems to be some kind of convergence. I want you to say whether you agree or not in the leadership requirements of universities and corporations, right? Similar skills are needed to run large, complex organizations. And so universities also are concerned with operational efficiencies and so on, but there are significant differences between corporations and universities. University leaders don't have to worry about stock prices and satisfying shareholders, but they have to manage a much wider range of shareholders or stakeholders of a kind. Their self-determined research agendas, short-term, long-term, and they're charged with protecting academic freedoms that may produce results that are uncomfortable to powerful interests. So in the context of diversity and inclusion, there seems to be a tension between academic freedom and these accommodating the cultural sensitivities of different groups. We have this cancel culture, woke, whatever. So this is the context. So I wanted you to reflect a little bit about, and then some people go on about, how administrators or the university administration has, grown and is, making faculty less important, and the salaries that are paid to the administrative staff of universities around the world are increasing. Faculty salaries or faculty tenure security is going down. So I wanted to invite you, in terms of leadership, to think about or reflect upon this. Do universities need more of this corporate leadership? Because all this VUCA, Barney business has really been generated in terms of how corporations deal with the changing world. So in that context, I wanted you to reflect upon whether universities should be like corporations. So let's go in the reverse order, and I'll ask Lulu to tell us if she thinks universities should be like corporations.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sudarshan. I think this is my belief, right? The universities can be running like a corporations. I mean, in terms of keeping try to balance between the financial sustainability and then academic atmospheres. Because as we also know, right, that we have to think about the well-being of our faculty and our staffs. And at the same time, we have to make sure that it will not affect the academic atmospheres within the university itself. So I found out in my experience as running in my universities, because I'm handling the operations, right? Sometimes there's a arguments between the academics and on behalf of the stakeholders, because they want to make sure that there's a sustainability for the universities. For example, if I take the pandemic last time, the COVID, it really hit us in terms of financially, because since we have an unemployment rate higher and we have students drop off from the universities, and we have a tight cash flow at the times. So we have to reshaping the business to make sure that the university can sustain at the times. So having the sense of business, I still do believe it needed when we are as leaders in the universities. So it will be good if we can balance between the sense of business and having the academic matters. This is what I believe.
Thank you, Professor Judith Rankin.
Thank you. Well, like anything in this area, it's not going to be a simple yes or no answer, is it? So I think there are aspects of corporations that we might want to consider. as universities adopting, but I think it's very important that we consider our local contexts. So not everything that we may want to adopt would work well in every context. So that's the first thing to say. I also think that one of the things that we've alluded to, but perhaps not focused on as much as we should have, is about what our student communities want. And we really need to be engaging with our student and our student bodies to understand how they see their university and how that they would like it to develop within all of these external pressures as well. So sitting on the fence a bit there, but I think there may be aspects that we can learn and draw from corporations, but I do think we've got local contexts and particular views and experiences that we need to continue to consider in the way we develop as universities and with the way we develop as leadership teams.
I made a reference to a tension between academic freedom, and commitment of universities to diversity, to sensitivity, to different, people belonging to different religions, different self-identification as male, female, or something else. And then there are, in many university campuses, I've seen protests against somebody who's not liked by some group. They shouldn't be allowed to speak. University of Berkeley had a big problem, and then the concerns about how much money you spend on security to a speaker who is unpopular and disliked by one group, but favored by another group. So any reflections on that while we are about it?
Is that directed at me? Sorry, or to
Yes,
the panel?
yes.
To me, sorry. Well, I think there are these various pressures and challenges on us around academic freedom. We have as our core values within our strategy three core values: equality, diversity, inclusion, social and environmental justice, and academic freedom. And those three values we uphold in everything that we do. I think for me, this goes back to something really quite basic. It's about how we respect one another and how we treat one another, and that we should treat everybody with dignity. And I think if we go back to our basic values and our core principles around dignity and respect, I think this can help us in some challenging situations, as you've described there.
Thank you. President Maestre.
I kind of agree with Professor Rankin about we can take some features, some characteristics of corporate companies and transport them to universities. It is kind of funny that our university, being a public university, has about 21% of our budget is composed of self-generated resources, because we are pressed of providing universal access to education to most of the population that applies for admission at our university. So as a public institution, we actually need to learn some things from corporations to integrate into our financial model, so we can achieve financial sustainability in order to provide about 25,000 spaces annually to new students. That's one of our main challenges every year.
Thank you for
Your
that.
mic is off. Thank you.
Professor Dewar.
Well, this is a fascinating topic. The universities are hybrid institutions, really, aren't they? I mean, they exist partly in the public domain, as for the most part, publicly funded institutions. But as Professor Maestre has just pointed out, universities also have to make their own way and often generate their own revenue. In Australia, less than 40% of what universities receive as revenue comes directly from government. So we're in a much more fluid situation, probably, as a result of that. So to answer your question, I agree with what I think is the general consensus, that there are aspects of a corporate way of doing things that we can learn from and apply. I mean, some universities are very large organizations that have massive budgets. Monash University here in Melbourne has an annual budget of well over $2 billion. Now, you cannot run an organization like that on that scale without applying some level of corporate type process and reporting to it. But you're right, there are many respects in which we are very unlike corporations. But I think the risk for universities is either overdoing the corporate mindset or picking a corporate mindset that is out of date. You know, I look at some corporations and I think they're actually more like universities than some universities, you know, because they have flat structures. They believe in empowering their employees, and you know, to Judith's points, have very strong values. They're very, you know, a lot of them are very values-led organizations, even though they're thoroughly embedded in the private sector. So I think we need to be careful that we don't pick a sort of a 1980s or even worse, sort of 1970s model of corporate behavior and apply it to a university. I think we need to be agile, and we need to be paying attention to what the best practices are in the corporate sector, but borrow them and apply them very selectively, bearing in mind the core purpose of a university, which is really for the public good. It's not for private profit, and that makes a big difference.
Thank you. I want to take up another question. Many people listening to us are concerned about how would university leadership respond to the challenge of, you know, the new technologies that are coming up every day, you know, artificial intelligence, chat GPT, blockchain, data science, robots, you know, the scientific infrastructure for, you know, different software that are used in university management, ERP, by whatever name they are known. And so, all of these challenges seem to demand some ability on the part of university leaderships for systems thinking, which has been around for some time, risk-taking, and so on. So let me begin with you, Vice Chancellor Dewar, on leadership and how it's to respond to challenges that come up every day with the new technology. You know, my colleague, Dr. Professor Mohan Kumar, in the opening session, made a reference to a requirement in our university we recently introduced, that you have to have the old-fashioned, you know, exam with no books and external references. Keep your mobiles outside the room and write answers, essays in response to questions and there's an invigilator walking around. You know, this is what you know, Bologna or Oxford or Cambridge have been doing. But somehow this scare of chat GPT, plagiarism, and so on has made some of these old modes of assessing students seem to be making a comeback. But you know, a more imaginative leadership ought to not go back necessarily to the old ways, but there should be some new ways of dealing with this. So I'd like all of you to reflect a bit on that.
Shall I go first?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. So integrity in assessment is absolutely vital for universities. It's our gold standard, if you like, and we have to protect it and assure it at every opportunity. Having said that, I think ChatGPT is one of the best things to have happened to the university sector, because it will force us to rethink the objectives and methods of assessment. My feeling is that the return of this, what you call the traditional methods, might be short-lived, as a kind of temporary response to ChatGPT and other AI technologies, so that they don't destroy that gold standard. But I think in the longer term, and maybe even the kind of medium term, we'll need to think of other ways in which we can assure the integrity of assessment in an age of artificial intelligence. And that will mean doing things very differently, probably. But we have to be imaginative, and we have to make some decisions, as you said right at the beginning, in the absence of all the evidence. We just have to make a call on the basis of imperfect information. I'm sure if you ask ChatGPT, they could write a very good essay on exactly this question. But for what it's worth, I think it's actually going to be a really productive and fruitful disruption of the sector.
Thank you. Professor Rankin.
Thank you. Well, yes, this really is a topic that has been engaging executive boards, I would suggest, across the university sector in recent weeks. Certainly it has of ours. And I have to say, I'm in total agreement with Professor Dewar. This is coming, whether we want it or not. It's here, actually. It's not that it's coming, it's here. I would also reflect that existing more traditional modes of assessment are not perfect. They don't respond well to some students with certain disabilities, for example, or neurodivergent, and that may be other challenges from the student perspective as well. I think we need to grasp it. I think we need to grasp it with care, though. I think we need to know what we're doing and educate. I'd go back to a point that was made earlier about leaders need to be lifelong learners. I think this is an opportunity for us to learn as technology is progressing and will continue to progress. So I think we should grasp it, but also maintain our integrity in that assessment. So we need to balance how we can work with technology, work with advances in AI, but also maintain that integrity that we must uphold as universities.
Oh, thank you. President Maestre, your thoughts?
Yes. Well, we need to be very creative. As universities, we are now in an inflection point regarding these new technologies on which we have to learn how to take the best advantage of them, but without losing the humanistic approach in our universities. We talked about empathy. We are currently facing a mental health crisis in a large number of students, mostly because of the pandemic and because of the recent world events. So right now we are at risk of losing most of what we achieved as humanity. So we have to really value the human aspects of education in in conjunction with the use of new technology.
Right. Lulu, your thoughts?
Okay. Disruptive, innovative technology is something that we shouldn't reject it, but we should embrace it as a universities. So what we are looking at now is that we use technology to support the learning process at our university as the supplement of our educations. As we also know that artificial intelligence and the use of the ChatGPT that now is quite famous right now is actually it's helping the lecturers to lighten the workloads of the lecturers. But what we have to do is we put the boundaries in terms of putting the integrity and ethics and code of conducts that what we should do as a professionals and also for the students, make sure that they knows what they have to do in terms of the integrity. Just like as our core value in our university, we put integrity as our value. So we are trying to emphasize that to our students. So though the advance of the technology can help them a lot doing the works, even for the lecturers to do the work as the lecturers, there's certain things that they cannot cross the borders. This is what they are there to emphasize.
But thank you. I think we have a little time, about 8 minutes, so we could, have a quick shot at another question that I find very challenging, which is what should universities emphasize in terms of teaching? Let's take undergraduate education. There's been a debate about liberal arts. Some people say that liberal arts, which flourished in the universities in the United States, have gone into decline, but countries like India seem to be in their national education policy emphasizing more of the liberal arts. If you think about it, at the height of the British Raj in India, there were only a handful of Indian civil servants, and they were mostly, they had a short training in Oxford and Cambridge colleges. Many of them were graduates of Latin, Greek, ancient history, and they had this short stint learning Persian, Sanskrit, something about India's history and its diversity. And these young men came out here and ran an empire for 200 years, and their educational background was that, right? And then, we now have a situation where the number of disciplines has multiplied. Industry keeps making demands that our students who are supposed to join industry have to be industry ready and know what hit the ground running and so on. So I'd like you to reflect as university leaders, where would you sort of, how would you react to this? Where would you place the emphasis? Should it be that, some fundamental grounding in ethics, philosophy is needed for all students, or, that the world has changed so much, we don't know what kind of jobs they're going to get. The technology has made many jobs redundant. Law firms are no longer going to be hiring people to draft legal agreements, because that could well be done by artificial intelligence. So these are the challenges. So I'd just like to your reflections on that. I'll begin with Professor Vice Chancellor Dewar, and we'll have a quick round on that before we close.
It's a big question to answer in a minute. Let me just give you one example from a conversation I had earlier this week. It's about the place of Asian studies in Australian universities, particularly studies of China, which are really important for all of us at the moment. But at the time when it's at its greatest importance, it's actually at its lowest ebb in terms of student interest in studying traditional language and cultural degrees in Asian studies. I think what's happened is that students understand, and universities have responded, understand the importance of having Asia as part of a wider mix of subjects for students to study. And that's led to the demise of the degree or qualification that focuses solely on language or culture from one particular part of the region. I actually think there's a really important place for the humanities, comparative studies, philosophy, and so on in the overall formation of a university student. And I actually think that's the way in which a lot of the way universities design courses these days, and the way they define graduate outcomes, is actually embracing that. So I don't think there is a decline. I think it's just a change in the way in which these subjects are studied as part of a curriculum.
Well, thank you. That's quite insightful. Professor Maestre.
Well, I think that universities have to focus on values, on teaching ethics, and the humanistic approach to science and research. So, on an earlier question, you talked about ChatGPT and other AI tools. So we need to emphasize on the ethical use of these technologies and how can they be used to improve the quality of life globally.
Right. Thank you. Professor Rankin.
Thank you. Yes, very difficult to answer a question like that briefly, but I will say a few words. One is I will go back to the definition of universities or universitas, which is as a whole. And I do think that we should be educating our students to have a whole-rounded education when they're with us. So that includes ethics and philosophy, integrity, accountability, all of those things. So I feel that we should be continuing to not only support, but embrace and encourage the growth of our humanities and arts subjects. And as the previous speaker has said, they cross everything. They cross IT, they cross medicine. I think of the growth in medical humanities that there is at the moment. There is an awful lot to gain, to learn for everyone from these subjects. So I'm a massive supporter of embracing and growing them.
Thank you. Ibu Lulu.
Yes, I do agree also that the main job of the university is to really teach about values to the students and about the humanities and how they have to behave ethically, especially with the advance of the technologies. Because like also we know that we call it cyber ethics. This is what they are trying to teach our students, how to use technology and cyber things ethically in a proper way. So yeah, I do believe that humanities should go across all the subjects that we have been teaching to our students.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a very, very interesting panel. I'm sure our audience found a number of insights, but I think they could all go away with being greatly optimistic that the leadership and going by this sample in this panel, university leadership is very well poised to cope with all these challenges that are being thrown at us. And I think all your observations on those dimensions, we could take up other challenges as well, but we don't have the time. But I think we've covered good ground in terms of the basic challenges of moving into the bunny world of brittleness, anxiety, non-linearity, and incomprehensibility, as is put. I think we can all be very optimistic, and it's also very good to close a session exactly on time. So I'm very grateful to each one of you panelists for your contributions to the conference and to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.